Jeff, let's get started and explain to the fans your background and tell them why you're qualified to run such a huge program.
Well, first off, thanks for having me up here, Daniel. Appreciate it. I retired from a 22-year federal law enforcement career back in April, and probably going back 14 years ago, I started getting involved in federal investigations involving the distribution of performance-enhancing drugs in sports, and kind of started to snowball from there as my name got associated with these investigations. I'd get calls constantly, both in the United States and internationally, and really became exposed to most of the big performance-enhancing drug cases in sports in the United States and in the world. And learned all about the drugs that were used. Learned about the anti-doping community that would detect these drugs, learned how athletes could defeat drug tests. But probably most importantly of all is I had the opportunity to sit down and have honest conversations with a lot of high-profile athletes that use drugs, probably in excess of 100. And I always use that opportunity to ask them, why did you choose to do that, and why did you go down that road? And the answer that came up 9 times out of 10 was really one word, and that was trust. And they didn't trust that their sports league cared enough about it because the system wasn't strong enough, and they didn't trust that their opponent or their teammate wasn't using who they were competing for contracts and money. So when we put this thing together, that word was at the forefront of our minds. And I think what we've come up with is the strongest anti-doping program in professional sports in the world that we can all really be proud of.
Jeff, I mean, that's a pretty bold statement. You believe that this anti-doping program is the strongest in all professional sports across the board. That's a bold statement. You have to explain to us and tell us what makes this policy the strongest in all professional sports.
Yeah, it is a bold statement, but in my experience, it's accurate. I think first off, and maybe most importantly, is we decided to give the administration of our program to an independent agency. So the UFC is not policing ourselves. We're handing that off. We're not determining who's tested, when they're tested, what the sanctions are, and who we're using is the United States Anti-Doping Agency, probably the premier anti-doping agency in the world. And in fact, at this time, Daniel, I'm going to switch roles on you and put my interviewer hat on, because I know you, as a U.S. Olympic wrestler, fell under the jurisdiction of USADA for many years, so maybe you can tell the fans, as an athlete, what your experience is with them. Honestly,
Jeff, as an athlete and the fans or the fighters, they absolutely have no idea what they are in store for. Testing now will be at a level that people have not ever seen. I knew every time I stepped across the mat from a guy that he was clean. I knew that he was doing the exact same things as I was doing, and I knew that we were on a fair playing field. Now, how did I know that? Because there was nowhere to hide. Every 3 months, when I was wrestling for the Olympics, I had to tell USADA where I was in the morning, in the evening. Hell, Jeff, a lot of times the person that just showed up at my house and tested me had dinner with me because I couldn't use the bathroom right after practice. But they were there. And if I wasn't where I said I was going to be, it was my responsibility. And guys, remember, I'm a little older. There was no apps and everything. I had to get the fax machine and send the adjustments to my schedule. But now it's 2015, and there are changes to this. It's much easier now, so there is nowhere to hide. If these guys say they're where they're gonna be, they have access at their hand to show all the changes. No reason to miss a test, is there, Jeff?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Daniel. It's changed a lot since you last experienced it. Everything's automated now. And in fact, someone came up with an idea a while back. I wish it was mine because it was a good idea, but they said, Jeff, you should subject yourself to what's called the whereabouts program. You should go through having to tell USADA where you are 365 days a year and subject yourself to being tested. So I've done that, and it's now very user-friendly. An athlete will get on a computer initially to let USADA know generally where they're going to be located. Then once they've done the computer update, they can use their cell phone to, if their plans change, to make a quick update. As a matter of fact, I updated this morning that from 1 to 1:30, I'd be up on stage with Daniel Cormier. So if USADA wants to come test me now, if anybody sees USADA collector up there, send them on out, and I'm ready to provide a sample.
Okay, so anytime you put a program like this into effect, we don't do it for fun. Guys, we are not trying to just say there is a new UFC anti-doping program and there is no repercussions. What are some of the repercussions for not being compliant under the rules under USADA?
Yeah, it's you know, kind of the unpleasant side, but the necessary side of things. There needs to be a risk versus the reward to have a deterrent effect and make a system effective. So under our program, a first-time sanction for a hard drug like an anabolic steroid or human growth hormone can be anywhere from a 2 to a 4-year suspension. And I'll ask you, Daniel, what a 2 to a 4-year suspension would mean to a UFC fighter, quite possibly a career ender, correct?
Well, especially for a guy my age. Like, if I was to get a 2-year suspension, I'm pretty much done. And honestly, the ability to not make money for 2 years, it's enough to scare guys away from doing things that are unfair. We've seen time and time again, guys have done things wrong, and the sport is going to change, and it's going to be because of the program that you and the UFC are implementing. Now, as we move forward, Jeff, there's a difference between, what's the difference between your previous position and what you're doing now for the UFC? Like, there's a difference, Jeff.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. In my previous position, nobody ever wanted to see me walking in the door, especially an athlete. In my position now, especially the fact that we've handed off the administration of this policy to an independent body, you know, I'm not in charge of deciding who's tested, when they're tested. I'm not in charge of handing out sanctions. My job now within the UFC is to become an advocate for our athletes, to help athletes like you understand our system, to make sure our athletes aren't making mistakes, to know which medications they can and cannot use, to update the whereabouts. You know, if as part of our whereabouts program, if an athlete continues to not update it or make mistakes, they could get possible strikes and sanctions from USADA. And as I've been out educating our athletes, I've told them, look, if you make one mistake, I'm on the phone with you. Yeah. If you make 2, I'm getting on a plane to come visit you and bring you to a computer terminal and make sure that you update so that, you know, those mistakes won't happen.
Jeff, we obviously know this is going to be a great program for the UFC, but the fans want to know, how do they find out what's going on with these tests? How do they know a guy's getting tested, and how do they get the test results? Because a lot of times it seems as though the covers are put before their eyes. They aren't able, they're blinders. Is this going to be a transparent program?
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes back to that word I mentioned earlier, trust. You know, the trust of our athletes and trust of our fans, and transparency is a big issue with this program. In fact, I invite and encourage all of our fans to go to our website, our anti-doping website, usada.ufc.org, and not only can they read our policy word for word on there, as our athletes are tested, the number of tests, the time of the tests, and the results of those tests will be available for everyone to look at. So a completely transparent anti-doping program. No hiding the ball on this one. Everyone can see exactly what we're doing.
So we're talking about transparency, so we're going to let you guys ask some questions. But first, if you're paying attention to MMA, you know everybody's freaking out about the IV rule. So I have the first question for Jeff, not as a guy that's interviewing you, but as an athlete. What is the thought process behind eliminating the IV rule? I mean, so many guys actually use it.
Yeah, definitely a hot button issue, and as we're getting out and educating our fighters, it's a question we're asked every time. This policy follows the World Anti-Doping Code rules and their list of prohibited substances and prohibited methods. And the World Anti-Doping Code prohibits the use of IV transfusions in excess of 50 milliliters. And the reason they do that is because there's historical evidence that athletes have used IVs in those amounts to try to defeat drug tests. In fact, in my former career, I saw evidence of that happening, that very thing. I can tell you, it's accurate. Because of the fairness issue and because it is kind of involved in the culture of our sport, USADA, being a fair agency, has decided to give a short grace period of 3 months. So this will begin to be prohibited beginning October 1st. Now, as part of my role as an advocate for athletes, I need to, you know, give our athletes other alternatives. And so we've been providing studies that show that within a 30-hour period from a weigh-in to a fight, if an athlete were to rehydrate orally versus an IV method, it's actually just as effective and much more safe for
Jeff, I'm raising my hand like the kid at the back of the class. Can we move that date to October 3rd that you guys redo the IV testing thing? No? Okay. I think you should realize that this is going to be a great program for the UFC and fighters going forward. Hopefully you took something from it. I'm glad you guys sat and listened through it. Very educational. Let's thank Jeff. Give him a hand. Give him a round of applause for being at the forefront of this and taking on this challenge. Guys, thank you guys for sitting around. Appreciate it.